Thank you for coming to talk about Plato's Pharmacy. This is a easily Derrida's most braggy text. It's a virtuosic reading of Plato. So even conservative classicists very excited about this reading, even if they don't understand it, they'll put it on their syllabus. It's a text where uh, Derrida's going to take on all of philosophy with drugs, which are one of my very favorite things. And my thought for how we do it is our goals for it are basically going to be get some familiarity with Derridian argumentation and Derrida. So I don't assume that anybody read prior to today. And we're going to read it together, and hopefully um, I can get folks to read. I understand I haven't heard some of y'all's voices, and I assume they're freakish, truly monstrous. So if you want to use a voice modulator or even use the TikTok robot voice, that's fine. But we're just going to read them out and talk through them and try to outline the argumentation. So we're going to try to understand what is the pharmacon doing and why does it beat Plato. So Derrida thinks that if we follow this thread of the pharmacon in Plato's Phaedrus, which is where the critique of writing is, where writing is called a pharmacon. If you've ever heard of Derrida speech writing stuff, this is one of the main essays that he became famous for that line of argumentation. I'm going to ask, why does this defeat Plato's sort of biggest concept, eidos, form? So if you've heard of the Platonic theory of forms, etc., uh, Derrida thinks that if we really carefully follow the pharmacon, and we're going to be able to take Platonism is going to be in some fashion made trouble for, have very severe difficulties. So I, my hope is that people ask questions. If you have any wonder about this or that thing, please don't hesitate to interrupt me. We're going to talk through it. I know the answer. So I know that's part of why I feel happy and qualified to do this. I know what Derrida is saying here. And if you want to just use me and just point to something and be like, hey, what's that say? Tell me. That's a totally fine way to engage with the group as well. So we'll just, I don't want to make people introduce themselves or anything like that, because people will be streaming in, etc. And I want to give you all your as much freedom to hide in your internet as you want. But also, please feel free to interrupt me as we move through it. I'm hoping we just get through like 1 to 2 to 3 pages today, because the reality is that if we learn really well just these 2 pages, this is the entire deconstructive theory of reading in just 2 pages. So we're going to move through it slowly. It's hard. It's not an easy 2 pages, but it is something that if you learn them really well, you'll actually feel pretty confident understanding how Derrida reads text, how Derrida moves through text. Um, so, and yes, we will just click the AI assistant if we have any problems, as Riki pointed out and suggested. Okay? Okay. So we're going to skip this part. So this is just a definition. I did of we just don't care about it. I do what to clarify. It doesn't actually mean bianal, by analogy. Just a clarification that sort of raised my eyebrows. But who would like to be a hero and read the first paragraph for us?
I can read
I can go.
the first one. Oh, perfect.
Hey, don't all speak at once. No, Joshua, go ahead. Go ahead.
A text is not a text unless it hides from the first comer, from the first glance. The law of its composition and the rules of its game A text remains, moreover, forever imperceptible. Its laws and its rules are not, however, harbored in the inaccessibility of a secret. It is simply that they can never be booked in the present into anything that could rigorously be called a perception.
Okay,
Just that
so
part.
oh, sorry.
Just that part.
Yeah, let's just stick with this first paragraph. Okay, so a few things to just draw your attention to start with, and then please feel free to ask any questions you want, and we'll talk through it. But so we have first this: a text is not a text statement, right? And so this is a very clear. You know, your sort of ears should go up here at saying, okay, a text is not a text unless. So we're talking about necessary conditions, essential conditions for being a text, right? So before we even get to the next part of the sentence, just setting aside logically, what we're about to say is going to be, Dara's going to start explaining a general theory of textuality, right? A general theory of textuality and a general theory of what texts are and how they function, right? So then what is the condition? You don't have to do the different highlighting. I actually think it looks kind of insane, but I'm compelled to do it right now for some reason. Okay, unless it hides from the first comer, from the first glance, the laws of its composition and the rules of its game. Okay, so already there's something about a text that in an initial moment of reading is not accessible. So we don't know quite what is not going to be accessible yet, but we know already that it seems to be at the level of form or rules or structure or rhythm rather than content. So if we were talking about a novel, what would hide would maybe not be the plot or the characters, but something about how the novel functions or how the novel is structured. So what hides a text to be a text hides its form or the rules of its structure. Okay, we don't know exactly what those are yet, what Derrida thinks those are, but we're just going step by step, right? Okay, and then, all right, so that's just the first sentence, right? So then we have a text remains moreover, and this moreover should immediately, again, our ears should perk up so we can say, hey, this is a new argument, right? So moreover, so in addition, this is going to be separate from this initial argument, at least in being more in some way. Forever imperceptible. Okay, so forever imperceptible. So we don't know what that means yet, but it seems like we're about to hear it. Okay, then we keep going. Oh, okay. It's not in the inaccessibility of a secret. Okay, so we already know that there's a distinction between, so a text is imperceptible, right? In a certain way, remains forever imperceptible, but not like a secret. Okay, so we can still get it, we can still read in some fashion. It's not like we can't access it, but there's something about perception and the mode of perception that is alien to text and textuality. And this is where Barbara Johnson Barbara Johnson is the translator of this, and she really sucks. But this booked phrase, I've spent a lot of my life reverse engineering Barbara Johnson's translations. I'm pretty sure she's trying to say, if anybody has any French, livre. It's not delivered. So it's not delivered in the form of a present. She's trying to make a pun. So, okay, so we've already got quite a bit. Okay, so for Derrida, text perception is present stuff. So we'll probably spend a second talking about what that means, what presence is for Derrida, why that matters. But textuality and reading is going to have some sort of allergy or alienness relative to presence. And for Derrida, perception is always intuition or reception of a presence. So when he says it's imperceptible, it's not that you can't read it, it's that it has some form other than a presence. Okay, so any questions or thoughts or anything that,
Uh,
yeah.
okay. Um, I don't want to like go too like fast or anything, but like I'm already seeing like something I've like kind of picked up on from the little dirt I've read into what about most of this idea of like this this uh this like critique of the present. There, you know, there's like I read the difference essay. I did not, which was a bit harder, and the voice and phenomena or speech and phenomena. I forget which translation I called it, which I think was speech and phenomena. The one I read, the version I read called it that. But this idea of like a delay, I think, is very important. It might be like an important aspect to this critique of present and like its relation to writing. If I'm not mistaken, for of osmosis, maybe.
No,
Maybe I
no,
don't know if that's going too fast, but yeah,
no,
go
no, it's not
on.
going to. No, it's not going too fast at all, and it's totally correct. Like, and in fact, what part of the it's a delay, and it's also a precipitation or going too fast, right? Part of the reason why uh, there's no present reading has some sort of non reading is sort of allergic or alien to the form of the present is because you sort of can't but go too fast, and presence can't but be deferred in a certain way. So there's a lot of ways there's a lot of ways to explain this, and we'll get into more of it a little later in these 2 pages. But a few general things to help with this present stuff. But no, absolutely no, that's totally accurate, true comment. Okay, so like, and you mentioned Heidegger, and it is worth noting. I don't know what is this ridiculous. It's getting so big. This is awesome. Okay, a little smaller. Okay, so like the slogan of this for Dairyland is metaphysics of presence. And so that's really just, and it is a total copy pasta from Heidegger. Like, this is a Heideggerian argument through and through. And the basic argument is that from Plato to Hegel-ish, you could say Plato to NATO. I mean, that's like, I like Plato to NATO. Jameson made that as a joke to make fun of Derrida, but I say Plato to NATO all the time. It's fucking hilarious. Anyway, all organized by value. Why is it making it so big like that? Okay, organized by value of presence. Okay, so everything that all the terms that philosophy like ends up really being excited about, like essence, substance. We're gonna make it smaller again. Essence, substance, uh, um, meaning, identity. So absolute knowledge in Hegel, absolute knowledge has to be completely present to itself in its presence. Husserl phenomenology, like the things themselves are present to consciousness. So present to consciousness. And so the sort of Heideggerian and Derridian argument is like, hey man, what a coincidence that everybody loves presence so much. Okay, and it's kind of a weird deal. So a lot of people are, so that Plato to NATO joke, like, oh, Derrida thinks everything's the same from Plato to NATO. Well, the basic argument that we'll be exploring it is that the eidos, the Platonic eidos, the idea, the form, is in fact quite stable over thousands of years. Is pretty is it definitely is identifiable as consistently stable. And uh, whether in a NATO meeting or in the forum in Athens, the argument will be, yeah, the Platonic eidos does pretty well. It does pretty well. And so we'll talk some more about the sort of general textuality and difference and sort of deferral and precipitation as we move through this. But yeah, no, absolutely, this is super relevant. Okay, so would anybody like to read our next paragraph?
I can.
Thanks.
And hence, perpetually and essentially, they run the risk of being definitively lost. Who will ever know such disappearances? The dissimulation of the woven texture in any case can take centuries to undo its web, a web that envelops a web, undoing the web for centuries, reconstituting it to as an organism, indefinitely regenerating as its own tissue behind the cutting trace, the decision of each reading. There is always a surprise in store for the anatomy or physiology of any criticism that might think that it has mastered the game, surveyed all the threads at once, deluding itself too in wanting to look at the text without touching it, without laying a hand on the quote object, without risking, which is the only chance of entering into the game by getting a few fingers caught, the addition of some new thread. Adding, here, is nothing other than giving to read. One must manage to think this out, that it is not a question of embroidering upon a text, unless one considers that to know how to embroider still means to have the ability to follow the given thread. That is, if you follow me, the hidden thread. If reading and writing are one, as is easily thought these days, if reading is writing, this oneness designates neither undifferentiated confusion nor identity at the perfect rest. It is the couples. That couples reading with writing must rip apart.
Okay, thank you. Beautiful. So we'll try to move through this slowly the same way. Please feel free to interrupt me if there's something you don't understand or anything, or you just have a question or you have a comment, whatever. But if we can figure this out, a lot of Derrida will become much clearer. So let's just move through it as slowly as we can. So and hence. So as a consequence of this argument about the present we just talked about, perpetually and essentially, they referring to the laws and the rules of a text, run the risk of being definitively lost. Who will ever know of such disappearances? So the basic argument here is that because textuality has some resistance or alienness to the form of the present, it's harder to archive, and it's essentially harder to archive. Something that you can present in a form that's identical to itself, that is complete, that does not have a future or a past other than its presented existence, is much harder to archive than something that is, right? So, and the ability to verify these sorts of forgettings there's a certain, so Nietzsche has this statement that a forgetting has ever happened, it remains to be proven. And because once you refer to something forgotten, you thereby demonstrate what you're referring to hasn't been forgotten. So the trace and memory is going to be a big deal for the pharmacon. So we're going to be talking a lot about this word pharmacon. And one of the meanings of pharmacon in this context is, pharmacon is first of all, just pharmacon is a Greek word. It can mean cure, poison, remedy. It's one of those words that just has quite a lot of contradictory meanings. The key thing, one of the key things at least here, is that in the Phaedrus, which is what Derrida is going to be reading here, writing is a pharmacon. Okay, and why? Well, one of the reasons, and the most immediate reason, is if you write something down to remember it, you're in fact never going to remember it, because it's like training wheels that you're always going to be dependent on. Why would you ever remember it if you can write it down? So the fact that you're taking notes or you take notes actually is a operation of amnesia in a certain way, not an operation of archiving. And so writing and what writing is for philosophy. We're going to learn that writing is sign of a sign. So writing is not essentially going to be like ink or like something or marks imprinted on a substrate. Um, Everything is going to end up being marks imprinted on a substrate. What characterizes writing in particular is that it's a sign of a sign. And it's a sign of a sign that's always going to be dangerous for memorialization, but also necessary. And so it's going to turn out that the eidos needs memory and thus writing, but something about writing threatens it. So I'm going to make sure this is totally present to us here. Okay. It's topical humor. So pharmakon obviously is where we get our word for pharmacy. And so part of the reason this is Plato's pharmacy is that it's just a general orientation of Derrida that he, except in very rare cases, very rare exceptions, he's always going to be reading the text of someone else and commenting on the text of someone else in a certain way, because nobody actually invents their native language or chooses it. You're always reading writing that has preceded you. Whenever you are thinking about something, instead of pretending you just created it like a god or something, Derrida's reading orientation and the deconstructive orientation is to try to read our inheritance as closely as possible so we can be vigilant about it and not think we're creating something new when in fact we're just repeating something from the past. So that's just some preview of this memory question. Okay, so here in this context, what Derrida is doing here is, so this, none of this is implicitly or is explicitly about the Phaedrus yet, right? But what we're going to get into and what Derrida is going to make clear is nobody's really figured out what to do with the Phaedrus. Classicists certainly have not figured out what to do with the Phaedrus. Classicists think the Phaedrus is like, when Derrida's writing, they think this, and they still kind of think this today. Like they really haven't learned too well from the Derrida reading, but they're like, that's a crappy early dialogue of Plato's. And how do we know it is? Well, you know, he criticizes writing, but he wrote it down. What a doofus, right? I mean, what a silly guy. But Derrida's argument is going to be that by following this thread of the Pharmakon and following this thread of writing, the Phaedrus, which is a very strange dialogue. It's about a bunch of different things. It's about rhetoric. It's about writing. It's about it's about desire. It's about love. Is going to be able to be united by this theme and thinking of writing in a way that classicists never really figured out and still haven't figured out, right? And he's going to be implicitly here arguing with the classicists in a number of different ways, right? And we'll get into that a bit. So when he's talking about any, for example, when he's talking about any criticism, so if you ask like a classicist about, say, Heidegger or about Derrida or something on Plato, they'll be like, yeah, it's really interesting, but that's Heidegger on Plato. That's not really Plato. Or that's Derrida on Plato. That's not really Plato. And I was really confused in my, I recently, uh, with a pretty conservative classicist, took a course on the Phaedrus and on the Symposium, and her sort of methodological guardrail was, we're not going to read anybody on Plato. We're just going to read Plato. We don't care what anyone says about Plato. We just care about Plato. And it's like, well, but aren't then how do we listen to what each other is saying? Because we're all people saying things on Plato. So there's no account. So there's no account from the class position of what their reading gesture is, what their intervention is. And so here Derrida is trying to say, with this embroidery and web, I'll say metaphor in quotes, it's not really a metaphor, it's trying to say you can't if you don't add something, if you don't read yourself, as in say something on Plato, you can't read. You can't intervene on the text. So when he says adding here is nothing other than giving to read. But that doesn't mean there's any relativism or any like, well, you can add whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. You can say whatever you want. it has to stick to the text. You have to be able to sew it on to the text. It has to be. It's very similar to what, in another context, Deleuze says about buggering and reading, if anybody is familiar with that. So I think we want to do the dictionary example with this web thing, but does anybody have any questions or thoughts so far about these paragraphs or about what we've talked about?
Um, well, I noticed that like there's this notion that you're criticizing of like that we're like adding our own sort of like writing in our interpretation, but then we disregard the interpretation of previous like notable ones. Do you think that this like there's something about like this I try to figure out how to phrase it, but this way that like each like that like we can discourse with like both from the text in the past and things about the text in the past as if they're in the present, but also be outside the present that has something to do with like this way Derrida understands like right. I don't know if that makes any sense what my question is, but like the way that like kind of like time sort of like it's kind of displaced in a certain sense by like all these different interpretations and even the text itself or whatever. I don't know if that makes
So
any sense or
no,
you know
I
what I'm
think
saying.
it's like it definitely makes sense. I'm right on the edge of feeling like I understand. Could you say a little bit more of so you're saying like relating this sort of disjunctive temporality, this non-present or this non-presency way of thinking about texts, and you want to relate that to uh, this question of adding or of responding to the text in a um, intervening upon the text in a different way. Is that what am I hearing that right?
Something like that, and also like how like you mentioned that they act people act as if their current thing isn't an intervention and therefore disregard other interventions in the past or whatever. When like
So
something like that, yeah, I don't know.
yeah, no, absolutely. So I think that no, I think that's like a no, I think that's like a brilliant way to. Okay, so like I think that like so I think it follows that. So if a text isn't containable in a present, if it has readings of itself to come, uh, that would be how Derrida would locate his own reading in a certain way. Like it's not that he's so like he wouldn't be able to add on the Plato's Pharmacy reading, quote unquote add on, as he does say add, but he wouldn't be able to add it on if there wasn't something in the text of the Phaedrus that already called for or promised in a non-present way, right? This future reading. Is that sort of the direction you're thinking of? Does that make sense?
I think that works. Yeah. But
Yeah.
also like this way that like we sort of like also like the readings of like the future reading of themselves sort of discarded in a certain way to this idea from this kind of like naive, I guess, what you might consider, let's say, you're adjusting and being kind of a sorry naive a bit perspective that like oh my current reading is not like adding on to this reading, so therefore we can throw out these other readings and get a more pure reading when like maybe there's something about like I don't know that other readings are part of there's something about that that's sort of part of the way that the original reading displaces itself as
Yeah,
well. And
so absolutely. So I think 1,000% this is correct, right? And I think the sort of proof is in the pudding. We'll see with how classes talk about the Phaedrus that like the sort of supposed expert position or the supposedly serious, supposedly pure position of we're not going to do that Heidegger stuff. We're not going to goof around with that sort of Derrida stuff. That's sort of his French antics and puns. We're not going to do all of that. I'm not defending the French, but just saying that's how they would talk about it. We're not going to do that. We're just going to read the Phaedrus, and they suck at reading the Phaedrus. They don't know what it's about. They don't understand why it's a coherent dialogue, and they just are like, this is one of his crappy early dialogues. So they don't read the Phaedrus. So it's exactly what you're saying, because they aren't attentive to these sort of future other readings in the supposedly pure text they're reading, they can't read that text, right? I don't know. Have I translated what you're saying accurately?
That seems
Yeah,
right.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, word. Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, I think that makes total sense. Okay, so we're almost done with this preface. So we're making good time. We've only been like working for like half an hour. So would anybody like to read this last paragraph of this? I don't know if he calls it a, he doesn't call it anything. Okay, so this, so I'm calling it a preface. Preface is a fine name for it. And then we have one. So this is like year zero. Okay. All right. Would someone mind reading this for us?
I can read. Um, one
Thanks.
must then, yeah, no problem. One must then, in a single gesture, but doubled, read and write, and that person would have understood nothing of the game who, at this du coup, would feel himself authorized merely to add on, that is, to add any old thing. He would add nothing, the seam wouldn't hold. Reciprocally, he who through methodology okay, bro. He who through methodological prudence, norms of objectivity, or safeguards of knowledge would refrain from committing anything of himself, would not read at all. The same foolishness, the same sterility, obtains in the not serious as in the serious. The reading or writing supplement must be rigorously prescribed, but by necessities of a game, by the logic of play, signs to which the system of all textual powers must be accorded and attuned.
Thank you. So this is like what we just talked about, and it's why like Derrida's like the number one gamer. Uh, the basic so the argument we just outlined about seriousness being unserious is this argument. So like if you think, okay, I'm going to only talk if and trust me, I've spent a lot of time with classicists because I really like Greek, and I just like there's no dumber people in the world. There's really not, but these poor folks, these poor people. But I think people who psychology majors are like smarter than classicists. That's the level here. No offense to any well, I kind of offense, but you're anyway. So like if you this like uh, belief in not wanting to intervene, not wanting to embroider is not serious insofar as the text calls to embroider. And in order to read, you have to embroider, you have to commit something of oneself. You're not reading at all if you're not writing in some fashion. So, like earlier when we said if reading is writing, uh, like if every time you read, you have to embroider, reading is writing, right? We could talk this oneness, this argument here is really hard. We can maybe come back to it at the end of this paragraph. But for now, like uh, uh, these are the general Derridian reading methodological considerations are this gamer consideration that how do we read? We read in a fashion that preserves the possibility of play in the text in a manner that welcomes the future, would be one way to put it, in a way that saves the text from being reduced to a presence in a certain fashion. So that's very quick for now. Go ahead.
Sounds like your main critique of these classes says that they basically just want to preserve a certain, because they want to gesture as some like pure reading of the text. There's almost like a pure, like actually what we might say, present of the text that they just want to reiterate to everyone that they teach it to or whatever, and to themselves,
Yeah, and
which is
I think,
exactly the thing that.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. Sorry, more. Sorry, I was
Go
just
on.
saying.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
fine. That was basically my point. That yeah, it's just that this is the classes are basically falling into the very thing, this metaphysics, the present thing you're talking about, and they're like trying to preserve this pure interpretation that just it just doesn't like change, and it doesn't even like really like play with the text at all or whatever, and it's just kind of like reiterating the same present idea over and over again back to each other and to their students or whatever.
yeah, absolutely. And it's something that like if you and you know if you bring it up to them, it's like something they won't care about. They'll just be like, yeah, I don't know. I never read those French guys, you know. And that's really the level. consideration for these arguments. So the response from Derrida is going to be like, okay, but you're not reading the thing that you say is the important thing to read, right? If the Platonic text in of itself calls for the deconstructive reading, then you don't get to say, well, I'm just a Plato expert. I only talk about Plato, right? I don't have to know about the Derrida reading, right? So it's like there's no sort of there's a consistency with the metaphysics of presence in how they talk about Plato, in how they read Plato, and in how they respond to uh, basically German and French stuff that's too hard. If Plato in of himself, and again, like so we're not against Plato in this reading, right? Or we're going through like we're examining Plato's pharmacy. We're gonna maybe create some trouble for this, like saying writing is this basically moral judgment of writing. Sure, gonna make some trouble for it, but Derrida only reads things because he thinks they're worth reading, and that there's something in them that is worth drawing out. And so Plato's pharmacy means like Plato's text is a bunch of drugs for us to take. It's a bunch of drugs for us to gather and use. It's not just IDOS stuff. It's not just bad metaphysics stuff, right? And so part of so classists who think like, oh, well, Derrida's against Plato, Derrida's against the Greeks, Derrida's against metaphysics. Like, well, no, Derrida actually like likes it way better than you do and wants it and is much more attentive to it you are. And I think like I love reading Plato. Plato's awesome. It's also, you know, metaphysics of presence, origin of the West as thinking of presence and as horizon of presence. It's both. I mean, it's good stuff and bad stuff, right? Okay, so wow. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's sort of like, I mean, like in a certain sense, they're like not just saying like you read this way or whatever. But it's like not even really like the text. They're criticizing. They say, oh, if we their idea, I think is maybe if we like read it through Derrida or some in some way, then we're not like the text speak for themselves. But they don't see the contradiction of like, well, we have this orthodox reading of it, and therefore we're not, and that's how we're going to read through the text through and filter it through that, and not saying that they're just doing the same thing that they think would happen with Derrida, but like in a less interesting way.
Yeah, exactly. So they have like their own sort of imposition onto the so like Derrida is never going to win his argument if someone else reads the text better than him, at least according to him, right? Like so if they have their own vision of Plato or stereotype of Plato that they're imposing, that's going to be Derrida's claim that classicists have. He's going to get into really soon in the next few pages, like how people just like have not been able to read the Phaedrus. You know, they just have no leg to stand on for their argument. It's not a matter of taste or of expertise. It's just like if Derrida reads the text better than you, then he wins the argument, right? It's not like a personal decision of, oh, I don't like French stuff, so I don't like theory, so I don't care. Which I mean, for some reason, is something that it's okay to say, even though it doesn't make sense, right? It's just the reason I got into Derrida really at first was like I thought he had the best arguments, and that's still my feeling. Okay, wow. So we've got these two pages done. I think we're ready to go on to the beginning of the one time. Okay. Yeah, awesome. So would anybody mind reading this paragraph for us? Oh, actually, could they read both, please? Thank you.
I
Anybody?
can if people don't feel like I'll do it. I don't want to like hog too much or anything like that.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay.
You're not hogging at all.
To a considerable degree, we've already said all we meant to say. Our lexicon is at any rate is not far from being exhausted. With the exception of this or that supplement, our questions will have nothing more to name but the texture of the text, reading and writing, mastery and play, the paradoxes of supplementarity, and the graphic relations between the living and doxies of supplementarity, and the graphic relations between the living and the dead. Sorry, I think I read that twice.
No, it's
Within
a
the
weird, it's
textual text,
insane. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
within the textual, the textile, and the historiological, we will keep within the limits of this tissue between the metaphors of the histos, and the questions of the histos of metaphor. Since we have already said everything, the reader must bear with us if we continue it on a while. If we extend ourselves by force of play, if we then write a bit on Plato, who already said in the Phaedrus that writing can only repeat itself, that is, always signifies the same. That is, it is in a game. It is a game idea.
Yeah, thank you. So basically, so if people notice, like everything we talked about here in these first 2 pages, none of it is specific to Plato. Like there are some, this is all of these questions about mythology. They're sort of prefacing and foregrounding what we're going to say about classicists, but none of these are all formal a priori arguments. A priori meaning true, independent of experience, necessarily true. These are all a priori reading arguments according to Derrida, right? So in a certain way, we've already said all we meant to say. Everything that we are going to say that has a presentable content has already been said. Okay, and so what we're going to be doing with Plato, specifically with Plato, will not be saying anything on the level of concepts, on the level of truth, on the level of meaning. And this is all that there is to say in deconstructive understanding. That doesn't mean that's all there is to do. There's quite a bit more to do. There's quite a bit more pages. There's a lot more pages. There's like 100 more pages. But that's all on the level of semantics. So like a list of things that might be useful. So on the level of concept, meaning, semantics, content, constitutive proposition, we're done. So like that's Derrida's claim here. So it's okay if we don't know exactly what that means yet. And it's okay if we can't quite follow this set of this list of things quite yet, but I'm not using this. I meant to just do, I want yellow. I want to do yellow thing. Okay, paint tool. All right. Okay. I've used a computer before. Okay, so it's okay if we don't really like know what this stuff is yet. The key thing here, I think, to get is just we have our deconstructive product is these 2 pages that's going to have a bunch of different versions. And so people have always criticized Derrida or like been sort of incredulous about Derrida in the sense of like, hey, you've got, look at all this stuff you've got that all ends up being pretty much the same stuff. Like fucking, you've got difference, you've got trace, you've got pharmacon, you've got, there are you've got Hyman, you've got Marsh, I forget, that's the mime one. There's a bunch of, you've got breaching in the Freud reading. There's a bajillion of them, and they're all just like, they're all conceptually the same. And the point is that on the level of the concept, this is all we have to say. There's a game sort of on a different level than conceptually, and it's always going to be unique to the text that one is reading and singular to the text that one is reading. So that would be what I would say here, just to start. So yeah, so any questions or thoughts based on what we've said so far?
With the type of game beyond concept, I'm tired. This is a bit like outside the.
No,
I
please.
don't know this. Okay, remember the difference. I say the reason that he spells difference in that weird way is because he's like you can only like see like you can only like perceive it or not perceive it but like read it without with like if you see it written out or I think it was like you can only see it like if you speak it out or whatever you can't like tell the difference between it and another word but so you have to see it both you have to both like sort of like see it read it or whatever to like see like the difference I guess the difference
Yeah.
to and this is like maybe this is one of these non more than conceptual games or whatever that that Derrida's doing, where he's showing that he's like using the very medium to like show the to show the medium of the term, to show the point that it represents or whatever in a certain sense, rather than just iterate a concept out at you. It sort of demonstrates it in a certain way, but what the term like that it's actually like it's presented in a certain way almost, or
Yeah.
not, maybe
So
not that.
yeah, not
Go on.
no, but I totally get what you're saying. Yeah. So like so just for people who are not familiar with the little difference joke. So this is like a little so Derrida you know he has some nice little jokes. He's got some little jokes. He's not funny, but he has some nice little jokes. And one of his little witticisms is, so this is the French word différence. And for a French person, these are both pronounced the same way. Okay, the the A with an A, so the reason Derrida wants to think this concept difference with the A is that he's trying to take there's this verb différer, and if you want to make it like a participle, so like you know how in English we have like resonance. Well, if you when you have so like this would be like differing. There's a still a like if you spell it with an A, it is grammatically linking uh, these two meanings of differ and defer in the verb form. Okay, uh, and it is pronounced just like this word is just means difference, right? It just means the same as the English word, right? Then the difference with an A is pronounced the same. So it's a very like little witticism joke about. So this is not a witticism joke. This is really important conceptual work and is exactly what you're talking about, Joshua. About like this is like a conceptual sort of is a not a conceptual difference, but a sort of writing difference. The AE difference is like, hey, you have to look at the written mark to figure out what's going on. If you just hear différence is the same. And so if, like historically, the metaphysics of presence says writing is the sign of a sign, and what does sign of a sign mean really? Well, it means, well, that's funny, like the written mark isn't working here. Okay, so I'll do a new box though. Okay, see, now writing can work. Okay, so if writing is sign of spoken, sign is sign of thought, sign. So like, that's how all philosophy thinks writing this way, like starting from Plato. So then if like you have to look at the written mark to figure out what difference is going on, then like it's a little joke. It's a little joke. It does matter a lot conceptually because of this, but yeah. So that would be that's the difference thing, and we'll see that like difference pharmacon is a difference. Difference is these are all like non-synonymous substitutions for each other. Okay, does that clarify that, Joshua, or is that
Yeah.
okay? Hope that's helpful to people. Okay. Um, okay. Okay. Wow. So we've made it. We've done a lot, even though we've made 3 pages. Like you could probably go home and be like, this was my philosophy work for this week if you're like have moved this far. But we're gonna soldier on. Okay. So we're gonna start over again. Let us begin again. Okay. Would someone mind reading for us? Let's say the next 2 paragraphs down to about here. I am happy to do it. I haven't, or, oh, no, please, go ahead, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
No, no.
Okay. Let us begin again. Therefore, the dissimulation of the woven texture can in any case take centuries to undo its web. The example we shall propose of this will not, seeing that we are dealing with Plato, be the statesman, which will have come to mind first, no doubt because of the paradigm of the weaver, and especially because of the paradigm of the paradigm, the example of the example, writing, which immediately precedes it. We will come back to that only after a long detour. We will take off from the Phaedrus. We are speaking of the Phaedrus that was obliged to wait almost 25 centuries before anyone gave up the idea that it was a badly composed dialogue. It was first believed that Plato was too young to do the thing right, to construct a well-made object. Diogenes Laertius records this to say, Logos, I have no idea, according to which the Phaedrus was Plato's first attempt and thus manifested a certain juvenile quality. I'm not even going to attempt that.
Schleiermacher.
Schleiermacher thinks that this legend can be corroborated by means of a ludicrous argument. An Asian writer would not have condemned writing as Plato does in the Phaedrus. This argument is not merely suspect in itself, it lends credit to Laertian legend basing itself on a second legend. Should I keep going?
Yeah, please, yeah, just finish the paragraph.
Only the blind or grossly insensitive reading could indeed have spread the rumour that Plato was simply condemning the writer's activity. Nothing here of a single piece, and the Phaedrus also, in its own writing, plays at saving writing, which also means causing it to be lost, at best the noblest game. As for the stunning hand Plato has just dealt himself, we will follow its indecent and its later playoff, and its playoff later on.
Thank you. Could you read one more paragraph, please?
In 1905, the tradition of Diogenes Laertius was reversed, not in order to bring about a recognition of the excellent composition of the Phaedrus, but in order to attribute its faults this time to the senile impotence of the author. The Phaedrus is badly composed. This defect is all the more surprising since it is precisely there that Socrates defines the work of art as a living being. But the inability to accomplish what was well conceived is precisely a proof of old age.
Thank you. So this account, we'll go through it just point by point, but the basic account here is like sort of the argument that we were previewing before, that if classicists and we're making fun of classicists, but anybody who reads the Phaedrus and anybody who comments on the Phaedrus, any classicist, any philologist, for almost 25 centuries, meaning everybody until Derrida, right? Everybody until Derrida thought this was a badly composed dialogue. That's pretty much the case. And the reasons being are pretty silly. I mean, we'll get into, so this question of condemning writing. So we're going to get into, yeah, go ahead.
My connection out, or did person?
I can't hear him either.
Sorry, what? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. My They turned my internet off and then back on just to because fuck them. Yeah, but I'm back. It's what? Sorry.
It's the centrists, bro.
So okay. So when did I cut off? When we were talking about
I think we're right at the beginning, like right
right.
at the text.
Okay.
Like
Okay. All right. Thank you, Rigi. So
yeah,
like
perfect.
so like um basically this is the argument that we were just talking about the question of like uh if we're talking about reading the Phaedrus, um uh up to 25 centuries, up to, so meaning up until Derrida. So like um the general account of the Phaedrus. So like just a few seconds about the Phaedrus, like so like the structure of the Phaedrus. So basically the structure of the Phaedrus is it's kind of it's really goofy. So like so the Phaedrus um first half love, critique of writing. Like I made that way too big, you guys. Why did y'all make me do that? Okay. So well, first half is like love, meaning of love, and second half, rhetoric, how to speak well, and there's like, I forget exactly when the critique of writing comes in. It's either like near the end of the first half or like at the beginning of the second half, basically. I think it's probably second halfish, but basically like classicists are like, okay, so like, okay, classicists, like, what the fuck is this dialogue about? Okay, like if you spend any time with Plato, like it's usually not that hard to figure out what the dialogue is about. Like however complex the dialogue is, usually thematically it's pretty contained, or identifiable. The Phaedrus is not that way. The Phaedrus is it's really unclear um, so in this question of love and the meaning of love, it ends up being, if people have heard, it's like it's about madness and love, and so like it's like the don't blame me, love made me crazy. If it doesn't, you ain't doing it right. That's like the argument of the Phaedrus, right? And then this question of rhetoric and how to speak well, what makes a good speech. Um, I'm pretty sure the critique, it's got to be right here. See, even I can't remember. I just read the Phaedrus. So I can't really remember where they put it. I'm going to put it in both places. But basically, so the question is like, why are these two halves together? What's this dialogue about? And classists, don't know. I mean, even today, they just got no idea. Like I asked my class professor, she's like, I wrote a paper about how the dialogue's about large language models, which I think is more credible than anything I've seen in class say. It's also about writing. So Derrida's going to say hey, actually, from beginning to end, it's about writing. Okay, and so this allows us to account for what the Phaedrus is and its composition without dismissing it. And so this critique of writing argument, so they're just going to say, where is he? Right? So like, when he says it plays at saving writing, right? We're going to get to that because there's also, the Phaedrus also talks about how to write well. And it's going to turn out that to write well is to write in a way that minimizes or contains the play of writing, that to write in a way, to write like speech as much as you can. And so Derrida's argument is going to be, well, that's going to miss the uniqueness of writing. That's going to misunderstand it. And Plato's attempt at domesticating writing isn't going to work. But it's not a simple condemnation of writing in the Phaedrus. And so if classicist like tells you, hey, well, Derrida thinks Plato was against writing, but he says some nice things. Yeah, Derrida already knows that. We're like on the third or fourth page, and he's already said that. So Derrida, again, really likes the Phaedrus. But he likes it because of the centrality and the rigor that the concept of writing and the pharmacons around writing are thought. So these are all issues that classes have not even begun to talk about, don't even care about. Like the essay's been out like 50 years, 60, 70 years. They're not about to like pick up this book and read it. Okay, so they're sort of lost. They're sort of lost. Okay, all right. So I will read these next two, so I don't just spend all day making people read. Okay. We are no longer at that point, so the point where we think the Phaedrus sucks, right? The hypothesis of a rigorous, sure, and subtle form is naturally more fertile. It discovers new chords, new concordances. It surprises them in a minutely fashioned counterpoint within a more secret organization of themes, of names, of words. It's cooler, more creative, more interesting, basically. It unties a whole symploke. I think that's like woven together. I forget. It's patiently interlacing the arguments. What is magisterial about the demonstration affirms itself and effaces itself at once. So the demonstration of the critique of writing, etc., with suppleness, irony, and discretion. This is in particular the case, and this will be our supplementary thread with the whole last section. Okay, so it's at the end. All right. Devoted, as everyone knows, to the origin, history, and value of writing. That entire hearing of the trial of writing should someday cease to appear as an extraneous mythological fan. So there are italics here, and it's hard to conserve, but like I'm sure. So like the French word for trial is so French only has like 5 words, and so like every word means a bunch of different things. So like the French word for trial is procès, which can also mean process. So Dara's like saying the italics has to be like him emphasizing the double meaning somehow. The process of writing should someday cease to appear as an extraneous mythological fantasy. So like this is how it is seen, right, by classicists, the discussion of writing. Extraneous mythological. This is weird. Why did he? Because in fact, there's going to be a whole discussion of the invention of writing and the creation of writing. There's a whole mythological explanation of it in the Phaedrus. It's not just a critique of writing. An appendix, the organism, i.e. the text could easily, with no loss, have done without. In truth, it is rigorously called forth, the critique of writing, from one end of the Phaedrus to the other. From one end of the Phaedrus to the other. Okay, so we're like going to read the writing thing, and it's going to be the necessity that unites and structures the whole Phaedrus for us. Okay, so a few things to affirms, and I need to get the painter tool. I'm figuring it out. I'm going to get it. Okay. Irony is a word we're going to examine. So if anybody has ever spent time talking to classicists about Socrates, whenever you like think there's something interesting or weird Socrates says, what they'll say is, well, maybe he just meant that ironically. Sort of like a Deus Ex Machina sort of saves. We can stop thinking just by saying Socratic irony. Derrida's going to think irony more rigorously than that, and Socratic irony more rigorously. We're definitely going to get into that. And here we're about to do it. But any thoughts here about like what we're doing with the Phaedrus, like relative to like classes?
And mind, I know like a person that's super into Plato, though not necessarily an orthodox-ish way, but still with a very particular. He's like really big fan of Reza Negrestani or some, and like some other person's reading of Plato.
Okay.
Yeah, but he was like got in like an argument with someone about like I think it was the Parmenides about like there's like a conclusion the Parmenides that like the forms don't exist and don't exist or something and like that Socratic irony thing you brought up like my friend made a point of saying like well that was like a Socratic irony or whatever or something like that which might be
No, yeah, it's
um
amazing. It's an amazingly versatile thing. It's just like a get out of jail free card, or like let's end the conversation here card that classes really love. Yeah, the Parmenides is fascinating. The end of the Parmenides, the question of existence of the form is fascinating. And the Parmenides is like a very monstrous dialogue that classes also sort of don't know what to do with. Deleuze loves it. I really like it too. But yeah, that's a perfect example of the like reactions. Oh well, yeah, Socrates was just joking there. Yeah, so we'll get into why Socrates is always joking, how we can read irony without it meaning like irony shouldn't mean you stop reading, right? In a Derridean understanding. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts about what we're going to do with the Phaedrus? Okay, cool. We can move on. So let's see how much we want to. Okay, so someone mind reading the next two paragraphs for us, starting here?
I can.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, starting from
Always with irony.
always with irony. Always with irony. But what can be said of irony here? What is the major sign? The dialogue contains only the rigorously original Platonic myths, the fable of the cicadas in Phaedrus, the story of Thais in the same dialogue. Interestingly, Socrates' first words and the opening lines of the conversation had concerned, quote, not bothering about mythologians,
Mythology. Yeah, mythologies. Yeah, something like meme mythology, something like that. Yeah.
um, not in order to reject them absolutely, but on one hand, not bothering them, leaving them alone, making room for them, in order to free them from heavy, serious naivety of the scientific rationalists, and on the other, not bothering with them, in order to free oneself for the relation with oneself and the pursuit of self-knowledge.
Could you read this paragraph too, please?
To give myths a send-off, a salute, a vacation, a dismissal, this fine resolution of Kyrian, which means all at once, will be twice interrupted in order to welcome these two Platonic myths, so rigorously original. Both these myths arise, moreover, in the opening of a question about the status of writing. This is undoubtedly less obvious. Has anyone ever picked up on it? This is the case in the case of the cicada story, but no less certain. Both myths follow upon the same question, and they are only separated by a short space, just in time enough for a detour. The first, of course, does not answer the question. On the contrary, it leaves it hanging, marks time for a rest, makes us wait for the reprise that will lead us to a second.
Great, thank you. So a few things about this, like, so okay, here's what I'll do. I'll use this. Okay. All right. Or I can even do this. Okay, so like, so Socrates near the beginning of the Phaedrus is like, okay, I don't bother with myths because like think of how tiring it would be to like prove you couldn't have 8 heads or something, right? Like this is I'm just going to remember this is like basically like I need to focus on myself is basically what Socrates says. I need to focus on knowing myself. I don't even know myself. Okay, I've got a lot going on in my life right now. Okay, he's like I've got to focus. I can't bother with myth, right? So there's a sense in which Socrates says, I don't have time for the delay occupation with myths, okay? And then, so like, there are two, so Plato, most myths in Plato, all myths actually, other than the two we're going to talk about, are myths that we have confirmation from in other texts and that don't seem to be things Plato just either made up or we only have in Plato. So the two myths are the fable of the cicadas, which opens the Phaedrus, which we probably won't talk about as much, I forget if Derrida talks too much about it. We'll see. I'm reading this along with you. It's exciting. And the other is the Thoth myth, which is the myth of the creation of writing by the Egyptian god Thoth, who's like a messenger Hermes style god. Okay, and so Derrida's marking like, hey, we were going to say no myths. We don't care about myths. Socrates wants to know himself. Then we immediately start talking about these two myths. Okay, and they're both opened. So the Thoth myth, right, is like it's obviously about writing. It's the creation of writing. So Derrida's got plenty easy game on that, right? But he's going to argue that also the fable of the cicadas is a writing thing. So again, Derrida's just pressing classes and pressing interpretation, saying in order to understand this Platonic text, we have to acknowledge writing centrally. Okay. Yeah. So that's how we're gonna dive in. So this is we're doing really well. It's normal to get a little. There's something really exhausting about Derrida. Derrida can never end. Okay, but we're doing great. So I think we're gonna soldier on, and we're making real progress. We're able to keep. If you can see, we're able to go a lot faster because of the slower work we did earlier. So I like to go fast. But you go slow to go fast later. But would someone mind reading this paragraph for us? Oh, wait, first, does anybody have any questions about what we just said? Any questions at all about myths, stuff? Thought it was, feel free to stop me at any time or stop whoever's reading or call the police, anything you want to do. Call the fire department, call your landlord, ex-landlords. That's all okay. That's all allowed. Yeah, would anybody mind reading this paragraph for us?
I can.
Thank you.
Let us read this more closely. At the precisely calculated center of the dialogue, the reader can count the lines. The question of logography is raised. Phaedrus reminds Socrates that the citizens of greatest influence and dignity, the men who are the most free, feel ashamed, aishkunontai, at speech writing, and at leaving sangrammata behind them. They fear the judgment of posterity, which might consider them sophists. The logographer, in the strict sense, is a ghostwriter who composes speeches for use by litigants, speeches which he himself does not pronounce, which he does not attend, so to speak, in person, and which produce their effects in his absence. In writing what he does not speak, what he would never say, and, in truth, would probably never even think, the author of the written speech is already entrenched in the posture of the sophist, the man of non-presence and of non-truth. Writing is thus already on the scene. The incompatibility between the written and the true is clearly announced at the moment Socrates starts to recount the way in which men are carried out of themselves by pleasure, become absent from themselves, forget themselves, and die in thrill of song.
Thank you. Okay, so I love, first of all, I love this, like at the precisely calculated. This is like one of the reasons I really like Plato's Pharmacy is that Derrida is like really not afraid to just brag and make claims like I mean, just can you imagine like an argument dependent on whether this is literally the central line of the dialogue? This is the literal center of the dialogue, but it's literal center of the dialogue, and there's this discussion about speech writing and a question of like statesmen being afraid of leaving speeches behind them. And logographers are professional speech writers that just produce speeches and would continue to produce effects. Like, so basically, there's a discussion between Phaedrus and Socrates about lawyers and legal proceedings primarily, right? And so, question of depositions and like legal testimony and such that are produce effects in the absence of the person. And so the key thing for Derrida is really writing is thus already on the scene. So again, remember we saw earlier that at the very end of the Phaedrus, I forget where he said it then. It doesn't matter. Y'all remember at the end of the Phaedrus, there's the critique of writing, right? And so Derrida's trying to argue that from the very beginning. So from the very beginning, so the very first discussion of the Phaedrus is about love, and it's between Phaedrus and Socrates. Phaedrus brings has a scroll of a speech, and there's a lot of discussion of like, hey, is that a scroll in your cloak? Or are you just happy to see me, sort of thing? He pulls out the scroll. They read it, and he reads this speech about love by this guy named Lysias. And so that's how things begin. And so Derrida wants to argue, like, Derrida is arguing, right, very strongly for like writing is the unifying thematic or the unifying structure for the Phaedrus. And so he's pushing that really hard here and saying, writing is already on the scene with this speech writing logography thing. And writing is also on the scene whenever we're talking about love. And precisely this non-presence and non-truth thing is going to be, if love or erotic pleasure has a sort of, if there's something ecstatic about it, so going out of oneself, being non-present to oneself, don't blame me, love made me crazy, which is the Phaedrus argument. There's something, so Derrida's going to say love is a pharmacon in the same way writing is. Phaedrus calls writing a pharmacon, doesn't call love a pharmacon, but it will sort of check the same boxes to be a pharmacon. We'll see. Okay, so awesome, cool, making progress. All right, great job, gamers. Okay, who would like to read the next few paragraphs for us? I think we can do a few more. We'll start with this one. Who would like to read this one for us? I can read again. Okay. But the issue is delayed. Socrates still has a neutral attitude. Writing is not in itself a shameful, indecent, infamous activity. One is dishonored only if one writes in a dishonorable manner. But what does it mean to write in a dishonorable manner? And Phaedrus also wants to know, what does it mean to write beautifully? Kalos. This question sketches out the central nervure. Thank you, Barbara Johnson, for that. Is that an I mean, I just struggle to believe that's an English word. The great fold that divides the dialogue. It could very well be. I grew up in America. I've never seen that word. Okay, between this question and the answer that takes up its terms in the last section, there remains the question of propriety and impropriety in writing. That is to say, the condition to make proper or improper. Isn't that so? The thread remains solid, if not easily visible, all through the fable of the cicadas and the themes of psychagogy, rhetoric, and dialectic. So again, Derrida's just pushing this argument that, like we've said over and over, that I've said over and over, like writing, the question of what difference between good and bad writing, writing as good play versus writing as bad play, that's what unites the dialogue for Derrida. And then I'll read these next two and then ask somebody else to read. So I want to read. I'm having fun reading, so I'm going to read a little more. Thus, Socrates begins by sending myths off. So what we talked about earlier about how I got to focus on myself. I can't be doing myths. I don't have time. And then, twice stopped before the question of writing, he invents two of them, not, as we shall see, entirely from scratch, but more freely and spontaneously than anywhere else in his work. Now, the Charine, in the Phaedrus' opening pages, takes place in the name of truth. We will reflect upon the fact that the myths come back from vacation at the time and in the name of writing. The Charine takes place in the name of truth, that is, in the name of knowledge of truth, and more precisely, of truth in the knowledge of the self. So people remember the oracle at Delphine or Delphi or whatever told Socrates, know thyself. And Socrates is like, hey, they told me know thyself, so I got to know myself. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. Socrates says this all the time. Platonism is a coming to self-knowledge, and presence of self. That's what Socrates is. That's always Socrates' jam. But this imperative of self-knowledge is not first felt or dictated by any transparent immediacy of self-presence. So now Derek is going to talk about what I just said. I don't know. It keeps happening. It is not perceived, only interpreted, read, deciphered. So again, when we have this is not perceived, remember we talked about like, this is Derrida's like drawing a rigorous distinction between perception as reception of a presence and reading as sort of contaminated by writing or graphics. So only interpreted, read, deciphered, not perceived. A hermeneutics assigns intuition. So hermeneutics being on the side here of perception of presence or perception of a meaning of a text, assigns after the fact the meaning, right? An inscription, the Delphicon Gramma, which is anything but an oracle, prescribes through its silent cipher. It signifies as one signifies an order, autoscopy and autognosis. Holy moly. The very activities that Socrates thinks can be contrasted to the hermeneutic adventure of myths, which he leaves to the sophists. Okay, so Derrida's just making a claim about how even Socrates' self-knowledge sort of supposedly coming from an oracle in the sense of the reception of an already known content that can be Socrates can assign to himself. Socrates has to read writing to be Socrates against writing. So again, Derrida just pressing the concept of writing, pressing the motif of writing, drawing it out as the central thing. Okay, we got some juicy stuff here. All right. Who would like to read for us? Starting here. And don't worry about the Greek pronunciations, Karine, Karine, whatever. It's not the end of the world. We don't know how the Greek sounded, actually. We haven't sicked machine learning on that yet. But so don't worry about the Greek pronunciation too much. But yeah, would someone? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and I can read? Okay.
If you want, yeah, please.
Okay. And the Karine takes place in the name of truth. The topoi of the dialogue are never indifferent. The themes, the topics, the commonplaces, in a rhetorical sense, are strictly inscribed, comprehended each time within a significant sight. They are dramatically staged, and in this theatrical geography, unity of place corresponds to an infallible calculation or necessity. For example, the fable of the cicadas would not have taken place, would not have been recounted, Socrates would not have been incited to tell it, if the heat, which weighs over the whole dialogue, had not driven the two friends out of the city, into the countrysides, along the river Ilissus. Well, before detailing the genealogy of the genus cicada, Socrates had exclaimed, "How welcome and sweet the fresh air is, resounding with the summer chirping of the cicada chorus." But this is not the only counterpoint effect required by the space of the dialogue. The myth that serves as a pretext for the Chirine and for the retreat into autoscopy can itself only arise during the first steps of this excursion, at the site of the Ilissus. Isn't this the spot, asks Phaedrus, where Boreas, according to tradition, carried off Orithyia, this river bank? The diaphanous purity of these waters must have welcomed the young virgins, or even drawn them like a spell, inciting them to play here. Socrates then mockingly proposes a learned explanation of the myth in the rational, rationalistic, physicalist style of the Sophoi. It was while she was playing with Pharmacia that the boreal wind caught Orithyia up and blew her into the abyss, down from the rocks hard by, and having thus met her death was said to have been seized by Boreas. For my part, Phaedrus, I regard such theories as attractive no doubt, but as the invention of clever, industrious people who are not exactly to be envied.
Thank you. Okay, so here Derrida's trying to push towards reading the necessity of the myths and the specificity of the myths for how the dialogue happens and the possibility of the dialogue. So if you talk to Classis about the Phaedrus or about really any Platonic dialogue, what they really do not want to talk about, or what they are really uncomfortable talking about, is everything that, I mean, to go quick, everything that makes Plato fun to read. So all the drama, all the relations between the characters, the staging, the theatrics of Plato. Plato is probably the most theatrical philosopher. It's between him and Hegel, like Phenomenology of Spirits, like a chamber play, nonstop theater. Platonic dialogues are as well. Platonists tend to think, okay, so here's how it works when we're reading. We've got if we have myths, so myth equal fun lesson for philosophy, according to Plato classicists. So like all this myth stuff, you know, it's fun that like Socrates and Phaedrus are talking. It's fun that like Socrates makes a joke about like Phaedrus having an erection and that being his cloak or whatever, or we can imagine him doing that. It's funny that they're like flirting the whole time. It's all great. But what we're doing is we're trying to extract a Platonic doctrine from it if we're a classicist reader, right? And so that's the orientation or relation to myth that Socrates sort of doesn't have time for. Basically, Socrates doesn't care about myths insofar as myths are just making constitutive, physical, rational claims about the world. So Derrida's here is just saying, hey, cool, we've got pharmakia. He's really excited about having this pharmakia person right at the beginning, and thus pharmacy, thus pharmacon, thus writing, right at the beginning of the dialogue, right? So that's what we're going to get into discussing here. So I think we can eat these two paragraphs pretty well together. But first, any questions or thoughts people have based on that so far? I don't know who exactly pharmakia is. I did at one point. It'd be something we would want to know. If anybody actually knows, or if somebody minds Googling that while we're reading, that would help. I'm actually curious. I've never looked that up. It's got farm right there, so it's definitely important. Obviously Greek mythological figure, but I don't know anything else more about it. Okay. Does anybody
You should
mind?
ask the AI assistant who's the pharmakia person.
Oh yeah, okay. No, yeah, we could. Okay. Great idea. You shouldn't rely on AI assistant for professional advice. Okay, while it's thinking about that, it's gonna read the whole dare. It's like OCRing the entire PDF and trying to figure it out. People who are skeptical of document titles will have realized I uploaded the wrong not OCR'd PDF. I do have an OCR'd PDF, which I will upload, but this is in fact, this title is a lie. It's not OCR'd. Okay, we're not going to do this. If somebody wants to ask ChatGPT while we're doing this, that'd be helpful. We'll keep going through here. It's a common noun and a mythological figure, clearly. But okay, so somebody mind reading these two for us, these two paragraphs? Be super helpful. You can be our pharmakia.
Let me see. Starting with this brief, I mean.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Let me get situated. Okay. This brief evocation of Pharmacia at the beginning of the Phaedrus isn't an accident. And horse Durver, I don't know, a fountain, perhaps with the curative powers, notes Robin, was dedicated to Pharmacia near the Ulysses. Let us in any case retain this, that is the little spot, a little stitch of or mesh, macula, woven into the back of the canvas, marks out for the entire dialogue this scene where that virgin was cast into the abyss, surprised by death while playing with Pharmacia. Pharmakia is also a common noun signifying the administration of the pharmacon, the drug, the medicine and or poisoning, was not the least usual meaning of pharmacia. Antiphon has left us the logogram of an accusation of poisoning against a mother-in-law. Pharmacias hata tes murius. Through her games, Pharmacia has dragged down to death a vertical purity, a virginal purity, and a unpenetrated interior. Only a little further on, Socrates compares the written text Phaedrus has brought along to a drug, pharmacon. This pharmacon, this medicine, this philter, which acts as both remedy and poison, already introduces itself into the body of the discourse with all its ambivalence. Sorry. This
No,
charm,
thank you.
this spellbinding virtue, this power of fascination can be alternately or simultaneously beneficent or maleficent. The pharmacon would be a substance with all that word can connote in terms of matter and occult virtues, cryptic depths refusing to submit their ambivalence to analysis, already paving the way for alchemy. If we didn't have eventually to come to recognize it is an anti-substance itself, that which resists any philosophium, indefinitely exceeding its bonds as non-identity, non-essence, non-substance, granting philosophy by that very fact the inexhaustible adversary of what finds it and the infinite absence of what founds it.
Yeah, thank you. This is a great place for us to have gotten to and to stop to talk through, because we got to Pharmacon and we got to, this is like the big game hunting force of what the Pharmacon is going to do for Derrida, right? So this is, so I haven't seen that movie Substance that just came out, but uh, it is like substance as an occult substance, or like a drug substance, or something like something unpresented in a substance would be a substance if it wasn't anti-substance as that which resists any philosophy. So Derrida's going to argue pharmacon names something like non-identity, non-essence, non-substance, and because of this, it's what gives philosophy itself. Philosophy is funded by pharmacons. Philosophy is drug money, basically, and the pharmacon is the source of that. So, wow, we made a lot of progress, even if it seems like we didn't go through many pages. So, thank you all for doing that. I can stick around for a few minutes to just for anybody who wants to talk about stuff or any questions. But this is an amazing start for. I hope you got a little more accessible for you, at least the Derrida arguments, because it really does read like Greek without some familiarity with it. But we really made a lot of progress, I think. So any questions about what we talked about or not what we talked about, or anything about, yeah.
Writing. Okay. So, we actually trying to think. So, Derrida, like, I don't know, maybe it's more like a factoid sort of thing. You said like it was like those, like it was like literally in the middle of the dialogue or whatever was an argument that like Derrida made or something, like or something
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you mentioned before.
yeah.
That like how does middle and West says like Derrida counted every like sentence or something or every word and said this is the exact number in the middle or something, like or they.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's like he wouldn't have to count every word just because there's standardized lineation for, all the Platonic dialogues. And so, he would just take the total number of lines, divide by 2, and then he would find the center, I assume is what he did. Uh,
Oh, I see.
yeah. But or he could have. I mean, I don't know that. That's my guess. Nothing. Derrida is the most obsessive giga nerd ever, so he could have done. There's a million things he could have done. But yeah, something like that, I would imagine. That's how I would do it.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Well, interesting. I want to hog up more. Because I feel like I talk a lot during these discussion periods or whatever, so I don't know. Well, someone else ask a question or something.
Yeah, sure. Well, no, you've been great, so I really appreciate your question because we're really good. So just, but yeah, does anybody else? But yeah, but don't feel like you took up too much space or anything. You're really helpful. And I'm not just now
What's
seeing the
the
pharmacy in the chat. Yeah, good.
what's the deal with writing in Derrida? Because he talks about it a lot. I came a bit late. You might have talked about this already, but like, what's the
Deal with writing
writing?
in Derrida? Yeah. No, it's a good. It's no, yeah, it's a great question. So like the basic thing is like Derrida's claim is if we were to like totally just go in a big, just sort of on the level of thesis. So Derrida's claim is going to be like, okay, um, all of philosophy thinks writing as sign of a sign. You know, so this would be like Plato to arguably to Heidegger, at least to Hegel. Okay, and so a sign of a sign is just so the concept of sign in its like total core kernel is so like the without which not that's common to every thinking of the sign, no matter who's talking about it, is going to be something like is going to be signifier signified, and philosophy thinks writing as sign of a spoken sign. So writing signifies a spoken sign, which then signifies a thought or soul sign if you're thinking in your soul or something, right? Basically, and that Western metaphysics as um, metaphysics presence and onto theology. So Derrida doesn't say like it's theological whether you're talking about gods and stuff or not. If you're talking about writing in a West metaphysical way, there's a theological structure at stake, and that is a originary presence before a fall. So a presence of meaning to itself, consciousness, speech, whatever, eidos of to the soul, then falls into written mark. And we're going to see that in the Phaedrus, like, and the analysis of the Phaedrus, that like you have the original, so the spoken sign is closer to the logos or father, like, and is like the spoken sign is like a good son versus the orphan bastard writing, because writing can like go places and repeat itself endlessly. Writing can't defend itself. Writing like its intentions can get messed up, but when you talk to like the spoken sign, it can clarify. And then like the claim from Derrida, this would be like Archie writing or whatever, would be that in fact there's nothing but signs of a sign, which then means there are no signs because the sign needs there to be a signified. So that's like so philosophies like moralism versus like writing non-presence is dogmatic metaphysical logocentrism. Okay, it's like it's also necessary. Like you can't just like give up on the concept of the sign. If we like gave up on the concept of the sign, we couldn't read anything. But that's why like deconstruction means rereading, repeating, in a manner that makes trouble, solicits, short circuits, whatever one is intervening in. I mean, that would be like writing 101 sort of dare to land argumentation, if that helps.
If we're asking like just a generic question about Derrida, that dude would probably take to it too. I sometimes hear like Derrida. I don't know, some like people that try to like super simplify Derrida will say like, I don't know, I get this big osmosis test, like, well, it's kind of like has similarity to like dialectics, but like it doesn't like resolve into a unity or something. Like a pretty simplified like way, which is then like it just as I find like an interesting idea, but I don't know what would distinguish like uh that like from like some other like attempts to like criticize like that like it's like I don't know things that sounds kind of similar to Adorno's like non-identity from osmosis from that, but I think Derrida's probably doing something different with this like unresolved or blurred like I don't know terms that don't resolve into a unity but are in a sort of relationship. I don't
Yeah,
know
so
if I
so so I
really understand my question.
no, I totally get it. So like so it's a very very big question. So like and it's something I think about a lot, pretty much all the time. This question of Derrida Hegel relation. So like basically, okay, like so I'll do another note. Basically, like um, so a few things like so Derrida Derrida is almost exactly the same as Hegel, and so whenever Derrida summarizes Hegel or summarizes when Derrida summarizes deconstruction, it's pretty much the same as speculative dialectics. So speculative dialectics equals Hegel. Um, so the differences I would say like if so like where to locate the differences because certainly like Derrida is trying to do something not exactly absorbable by Hegel, not exactly the same as Hegel, right? So, but why? So how? Why and how? So would be two questions. Like, and I'll paste like I did like a presentation like on exactly this recently, but just a few things to locate the differences would be first. I don't think it's not going to be like it's not really satisfying to describe as unity or not, just because there's plenty of moments in Hegel where um, and certainly like the end of the phenomenology sort of just sends, if people are familiar with the end of the phenomenology, it just sends you back to sort of rinse, lather, and repeat and never stop repeating. You sort of don't ever like like Hegel doesn't really resolve into a unity either in any straightforward way. Absolute knowledge is, I would struggle to describe it that way. Basically, is super absolute knowledge is super plastic and is meant to be um, completely flexible, hospitable in responding to any event or thing that it would be confronted with, or datum or anything, right? It's not an encyclopedia. It's not a stable body of knowledge. It's not a or encyclopedia in the simplistic sense of like it obviously you could have a different meaning. There's different meaning of but like in the sense that you think, hey, I have all the knowledge, I'm done. So there are a few different ways you might distinguish. Like so one way would be that Derrida is going to argue. Uh, so like Hegel needs so in the essay we're going to read at the zoo after this one, restricted to a general economy. Um, Hegel needs meaning to follow from thought, activity, dialectical work, even sort of he's a speculator that can't lose, basically. He's like the greatest financial speculator ever, and so he cannot think a result of a dialectic machine as not having a meaning, not having a hermeneutics, not having a conceptual content, even if he's completely open as to what that conceptual content might be. And the Derridian argument would be, insofar as he is dependent on something non-representable, non-conceptual, and he doesn't think it. So Bataille has a list of things that like supposedly aren't in the phenomenology. I don't think he's right about all of them, but he's like laughter, orgasm, poetry, a bunch of things. Hegel would be dependent on these things without being able to think them, and would thus be natural consciousness. But it's a whole big can of worms, basically, of a whole big sort of debate. And I think what I would say is thinking about, I really like reading Hegel. Hegel's really great. And I don't think even if I think the deconstructive presses on Hegel often do some good damage, make some trouble for it, there's no I think the ways Hegel tends to be summarized as beaten by post-structuralism tends to be really way simpler than things are. Yeah, and I think that I really like reading Hegel and work on Hegel right now. Hegel's pretty dope. So I don't know. Does that help? Or I hope it helps. Yeah. Anyway.
Can
Yeah.
I add something on the absolute knowledge thing?
Yeah. Please. Sure.
So the common sort of thing to say about Hegel, especially in academia now with people like Brady Bowman and stuff, is that Hegel really wrote like one book, and that being the Logic, and that every other kind of thing he wrote was just a replay of the Logic, but like through a different lens. So phenomenology would be like looking through, I don't know, knowledge or consciousness through the Logic. And the issue with, the this is a bit abstract, but like the issue with looking at absolute knowledge in that sort of way is that the logic, right at the end, right as you reach the absolute idea, the logic opens itself up. It in the sense that the logic doesn't end, right? Because the logic needs to flow into the philosophy of nature. And the philosophy of nature, again, is just a replay of the logic again. And looking at absolute knowledge in that sort of respect, where you reach absolute knowledge, and that's kind of the point where knowledge opens itself up. The kind of traditional understanding of that is that, well, that's kind of the point where Hegel says this is where you've fully grasped, let's say, religion, or this is the point where you fully grasped the idea of something, where you fully grasped the science. Not that you know all the concepts, not, all the contents of a science, but that you grasped its idea. You grasped its formal structure and everything in the logical sense of it, right? Because that's what the logic is. The logic is really just telling you how to grasp the logical structure of things as they are. And that's why the logic, again, applied is just like, or why every other Hegel book is just the logic applied to different sort of concepts. You see kind of the logical structure of those things. You see like the logical structure of consciousness isn't just that, oh, I think and stuff like that. No, it's also that you're a person in history, there's religion, there's art, there's a lot of other stuff. That's kind of the traditional reading um of absolute knowledge then, right? It would be that absolute knowledge is kind of the point where you grasp entirely the science of knowing, or the science of consciousness in the case of the phenomenology. Um, but the issue then, again, it's the fact that it has to open itself up then, right? It has to lead into something else, but that something else is never given. And that's kind of, I think, where the whole plasticity thing comes along, right? Where we have no idea what it's opening up into. The logic opens up into nature, because nature is just the idea opposed to itself. Um, so the opening up of of the of absolute knowledge would be the opposition of absolute knowledge to itself. which I don't know what it could be. Does Derrida have anything on that?
Yeah, Derrida agrees and assumes all that. So like Derrida like agrees completely with everything you just. So he's like so Derrida's like thinks that so like the idea that absolute knowledge has a content, or that if there's a problem with absolute knowledge, it's certainly not that it sort of programs a content or programs knowledge in the sense of something we would know already. And if there is any sort of issue with Hegelianism or dialectics, it's never going to be that Hegel didn't try to be open or try to be plastic or try to not prejudge knowledge, right? Like one of Derrida's, like, this is like top 5 anime betrayals. Like Derrida's constantly defending Hegel against Heidegger, right? And saying, and just constantly saying like Hegel took more precautions, was more open than Heidegger realized, right? Like so there's just so Derrida's claim would just be total agreement with what you just said. The claim would be that there are other ways to occult or annul the future than to precipitate content, would be the claim, and that if there are short-circuiting moments in Hegel, or moments that Derrida trawls for, like the status of time in the Absolute Knowing chapter of the Phenomenology, uh, like the relation between revealed religion and absolute knowing. It's very hard to distinguish what the difference between if Christianity is different from all previous religions because it posits the sort of unhappy consciousness disjunction between the singular and or the individual and the universal, then it's very difficult to distinguish absolute knowledge from that self-posit, right? Like there's because Hegel's ability to distinguish stages and to
Well,
distinguish.
can I
Yep,
can I
yep,
just say something there? That
sure.
reading of religion and unhappy consciousness in Hegel comes entirely from Hippolyte. And I think it's a very misguided one considering
I've
what
not
Hegel
no,
says in his philosophy of history. Just to say this, it's not that Christianity itself overcame unhappy consciousness. In the philosophy of history, Hegel notes that like Christianity itself it wasn't a phase of unhappy consciousness itself during stuff like the Crusades. Hegel writes that he hates monks because of that, right? He said that, monks are fucking dumbasses who are unhappy, like who are physically in unhappy consciousness. The point Hegel's really making is that it isn't Christianity itself that overcame that, but it's rather kind of the destiny of Christianity or where Christianity led into, which then overcame that and got into reason, right? That's kind of the moment for Hegel where Luther comes in, where Martin Luther comes in and says, hey, the Crusades were dumb, the church is dumb, we're gonna have to do something else entirely. That's what reason is for Hegel, and that's kind of that the same moment. Again, we talked about this earlier, where like it's the idea going out of itself to observe itself. That's exactly what Luther for Hegel kind of did. He walked out of Christianity to look Christianity back in on itself. He was the idea. It was still Christianity. It was still the idea, but it was just outside of itself, looking inward to itself. And that's
Yeah,
that's kind of the point of
sure,
reason.
sure,
And that's
sure. That's all fine. So that's all fine though. But so I would just say that that the reading I just did. So I've never read Hippolyte on it. I've only read the Phenomenology, and I'm only distinguishing the religion chapter and the absolute knowing chapter, and the distinction between Christianity as explored in the revealed religion chapter for absolute knowing versus other religions and absolute knowing versus Christianity. I totally agree with you that Hegel isn't just signing off on all sorts of Christianity, etc. So Lutheran. There's no way to think. At one point, Derrida says like you can't think Hegel's Christianity nor Heidegger's Christianity without thinking Luther. Total agreement with you there. But I do think that like it's that what you have just I haven't read the parts of philosophy you're talking about. I think that sounds really interesting. It doesn't. It seems totally constant though with the phenomenology of spirit, and that like the argument here is not really the problem here isn't, at least the way I was articulating, like, oh, Christianity, oh, we need to be against Christianity or this or that or anything like that. It's more just like in order to understand what distinguishes Christianity from all prior religions, uh, uh, it's completely mystical and indecipherable in the terms of the phenomenology of the spirit, because the difference between Christianity and the other religions is the same as the difference between absolute knowing and Christianity. So if Christianity was better than the other religions or more advanced or further along because it posited this incongruity, this disjunction between being a finite being and also being universal, infinite, however you want to summarize it. Absolute knowing then can't be different from Christianity because it posits that harder. Christianity already posited it. And it's just one example of a sort of short circuit or weird transition in Hegelianism that would indicate the necessity of thinking uh, uh, basically a deconstructive understanding as a conditional possibility of Hegel. I just think like Derrida agrees with everything I've ever heard you say about Hegel. Sort of what's confusing to me, and so I don't know it's something I want to talk about more. And you know Hegel better than I do in terms of the text, no question. But I think like I promise you that Derrida is not just like reading Hippolyte. That's like an anti-French racism that is not an advanced. So I'm pro-French racism, but I want it to be smart, and that's just like that. That's maybe accurate of for a certain Deleuze, but it's not. It's not how Derrida approaches Hegel. That's all I would say. Sorry to talk over you.
No, it's fine. On the thing that you said of that Christianity is absolute knowing. Like again, I think the distinction to be made is that Christianity is absolute knowing insofar as it is Christianity um, upon realizing the whole like because in the phenomenology like right between like the ending of absolute religion and the beginning of absolute knowing you get a big issue of well, you know, if this world is so divine, and you know, if Christianity is as good as it is, you know, where's the essence of this in the world? And that's kind of where absolute knowing comes in. It's I think I think we've talked about this before, but absolute knowing really comes in after Christianity, and this is also kind of like the Lutheran moment as well, where Christianity realizes that it alone isn't like the thing that makes up the world, right? Because it would be too spinozistic to say that, you know, oh well, you know, to understand the whole structure of the world, you need to understand Christianity. That would be like a very spinozistic reading of Hegel. That would be saying like, okay, well, you know, you got to understand Christianity or God or whatever to be like the substance. But the whole point Hegel makes is that well that doesn't exist. You can try doing that, but that like that kind of spinozistic Christianity doesn't exist. He kind of goes he goes and like
What
this
do
is
you mean
something
it
that he
doesn't?
does.
Sorry, what do you mean doesn't it? Because I don't know if because I just think like I'm not saying that you have to do Christianity for it, but you need to do something like Christianity. Christianity has discovered the Trinity, has discovered the
Well,
infinite and the finite, finite and the infinite in a way no other religion has for Hegel. I mean, uh,
yeah. But the thing is to say that Christianity is absolute knowing, um, in a sense puts Christianity on the same level as absolute knowing.
well, the
And the
question is
issue
how to
that would be
distinguish on the
taken
term.
there.
Yeah, it's just how to distinguish
No,
on the terms of what he's saying. I'm not equivocating that. I'm just saying like
yeah.
if
No, but I just wanna add on that the reason why absolute knowing even comes in is because Christianity fails. And that's the whole point. It's that you can't do a Christian Wesensschau, if that makes sense, to the world. It's the problem of where do I find this Christian essence in the world? And on its own you can't. Logically you can though. That's the thing. You need the logic in order to do that. And that's kind of the whole there's a big argument made by what's their name? Like Rebecca Comey and Frank Ruda, they make like the big point of like how the logic and the phenomenology are interconnected through like, you know, how they're written. And I mean even if I don't really believe in that, there's that kind of point where it's not that you need Christianity, but it's that Christianity and philosophy and even art, all of them embody the absolute idea, and it's recognizing the absolute idea, which is absolute knowing. That's the big thing. And it's the fact that Christianity is itself logically structured that you can then go ahead and say that Christianity reaches absolute knowing. But on its own, it doesn't do this. If you were just a Christian, you wouldn't be able to do a Christian Wesensschau. Like
sure,
that's the
just
whole
the
point of that's the whole point of calling, you know, that kind of reading like a way too Spinozistic reading of Hegel that
yeah.
I mean Hegel himself doesn't subscribe in his reading of Spinoza in the History of Philosophy. That's
So
kind of the
like
big thing.
so the question so like in the universe of this argument, this objection on this one example of a transition that is weird, the question would be insofar, so why is Christianity not sufficient if Christianity's difference with other religions is the same as absolute knowing's difference with Christianity, right? That's the claim. So the claim is like you don't, and so this question of, and so I think that and when you list all the different things, and so like religion, art, etc., and you like talk that say they all embody the absolute idea, it's important to recall, like for Hegel, they all defer through representation and picture thinking in a way that absolute knowing supposedly doesn't, right? And so there is an absolute privilege for absolute knowing that is, I think, I don't know. I would want to talk to you more about the like question of linking the different texts together, etc. I think that's very interesting question. I just think that like what I was saying was one microcosm of this is a weird transition in Hegel that I think is indecipherable. An example of other ones. Two are what deconstructive reading tries to zero in on to find alternative ways of thinking or ways of reading and writing to speculative dialectics. That's the claim. So I do think this one example works, but it's one example among others. Is all I would want to underline. Yeah.
I agree with you, but I think that that kind of, issue of reading, to me at least, it goes away once you kind of realize, like, once you take in the logic before the phenomenology. That's kind of my big counterpoint to that. It's that I think the things that Hegel says about, like the thought of Christianity itself is logical. It's just that Christianity itself doesn't reach that point. But it's the thought, right? That's the big thing for Hegel. It's thought. It's thought thinking itself. And if the logic can reveal to us these, kind of logical structures of things, like of Christianity or whatever, then Christianity does in the end come out to be that sort of absolute religion. At least more than something like Judaism or something, right? Judaism for Hegel
Yeah.
is
Way
forever
more than
stuck within.
Judaism. Yeah. Way
Yeah,
more than Judaism.
I mean, he makes this point very clear in
Yeah.
Unhappy Consciousness, and then later on in Religion. Um, but like that's kind of the big point. It's that for Hegel, it really is the logic that's super important, and that's kind of the one thing that I think Hippolyte did well in his reading of the phenomenology. Where, like, if there's anything to say about Hippolyte, it's the fact that he not only talks about the logic in that book, and he does a decent reading of it, but he also talks about uh, Hegel's, Jaina writings on logic and metaphysics and stuff, and how they also like have a big role to play in the phenomenology. And like this is stuff that if you were living in Hegel's time, you would have no idea about because like all of this is post-Hegelian. Like all of this is like it came out after Hegel's death. And this is it makes no sense in Hegel's time, and I think there's definitely a point to make about how would you read Hegel in his time. But for me, I think like the most holistic way to read Hegel is to read him through the logic. Because as I said, and this kind of goes back to, how do the texts link together? Well, there is only one text in Hegel, it's the logic, and everything else is just a spin on the logic
Well,
in some certain way.
then I guess then the question would just be like, it seems like you're sort of in advance disqualifying what the phenomenology says about itself and its own relation to the science of logic, right? If like the end of I was trying to find if I had the PDF easy to pull up, but it's just like the last page of the phenomenology is quite emphatic that you can't make a one-sided evaluation of historical coming to be of consciousness, the phenomenology of spirit, versus the science of knowing or science of logic, right? That they sort of reciprocally need each other. Neither is more rich, right? And so I think you have to just like cross that out. I think for your just like read the logic first to make sense. There's a question of like
Well,
how does yeah.
the thing with that is that that's only true insofar as like someone doesn't know speculative thought. Like this is the whole point of the phenomenology to an extent. Like the reason why it's part one of the philosophical sciences, and then why logic and like why it's swapped later in Hegel's life. Because in the beginning it was the phenomenology that was meant to be first, and then later, as he wrote the encyclopedia, he put spirit like at the end. The reason why he did that is because he intended for the phenomenology to be the sort of thing that you would build up to then eventually when you move to the logic and then when you have to think being, like pure being only for itself, that you could then break down, and Hegel says this in the intro to the encyclopedia as well. it's you would need to understand absolute knowing in order to think being like on its own. That's the thing. And insofar as neither text is more important than each other, yeah, because you wouldn't be able to think like the concept of being without having the absolute idea in mind. You wouldn't have that sort of teleological image of logic that Hegel wants or needs you to have in order for the logic to make sense. But it also goes both ways where, well, if you don't understand that that's what the phenomenology wants you to do, you're probably going to walk out of absolute knowing not getting what he wants you to do with absolute knowing. It's it's very it's it's a dual-edged blade, I guess.
Yeah, and I
I,
think yeah, it's good, Joshua.
I don't know.
People,
I was initially thinking, oh, my. I've been in the first half of this like discussion between Slinky and Derry. I thought the problem was I started with the logic and haven't gone done through all of the phenomenology yet. Where now I'm thinking near the end that like I did in the right order, but maybe I need to read the logic again. I don't know before I
Do whatever you want.
do
Like that.
phenomenology.
I
don't
I
believe
said it.
when Slinky says do whatever you want. Okay, don't believe that. He does. Yeah.
Read
No.
Hippolyte. Read Hippolyte before anything else. Read Being and Difference. Or wait, Being and how what's it called? What's the Hippolyte book called?
I don't know. I don't know from Hippolyte. I don't know. I've never read Hippolyte. I just have read of him. But
No,
I
Logic and
think,
Existence. Sorry, read Logic and Existence from Hippolyte. It's great.
but
It's the only book on Hegel you need.
I think that at some point we got to read Klang, the Derrida Intro to Hegel. That's going to be amazing. But that has like all these arguments. But like I think that like one of the reasons why like there's this funny like, oh, which do I read first, which do I go first, which do I do first sort of thing, is that Hegel structurally has a very complex temporality, and it's never going to be as simple as like I think logic first or phenomenology first. I mean, there's going to be like if you exactly like you're right, you can read the phenomenon, and at any stage of the phenomenology you can just get up and walk away sort of and not figure it out, or you could be like a Pittsburgh Hegelian and you could be like, I need to just convert Hegel to stupid constant propositions, right? Like, and it's just like and pretend that there's no such thing as speculative movement of thought. I mean, like all of these bad readings of Hegel are possible. And there's a question of like asking why are they possible? Why is it possible to read Hegel badly? It's another deconstructive question. But I don't want people to feel rude about leaving where we said we were going to go 2 hours. Don't feel bad if you've got a dipper. I can hang out for a
I
few more
don't have
minutes, but
anything to do right now.
yeah.
I don't know. Uh, I know that like Derrida wrote like an intro to like this one person's book about Hegel. Like I think it's
Am I?
was it Captain
Malibu.
Malibu's book? Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, then, you know, you use the term plastic, and I think it's called Hegel and plasticity or something like.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
I I
just
think
what did go on? Both of you.
like on that kind of point of like, which should you read first? Uh like I agree with what Darren said, where it's like Hegel like never wants you to have a straightforward answer. And that's kind of like just to diverge a little bit. The whole point that Hegel really makes in the logic is that thought always has two sides. It's never like just this one thing. That's his kind of big thing, the essence. That's kind of how that's how he counters Fichte. He says that Fichte has like a one-sided dialectic. He never like the Fichtean dialectic only has a positive or a negative. It never has both. With Hegel, the whole thing is you have to always have both. And
Oh,
it's
isn't it like isn't it like three and it goes up to three and like the third in the concept section? You can't even just
well,
have
no,
two.
that's kind of like this is mostly like Hegel anti Deleuze, where Deleuze just claims that Hegel only has the negative. But like the thing that makes the dialectic move is both the negative and the positive. That's the big kind of thing. And that you need both the negative and the positive to have any movement at all in the dialectic. And the big point that kind of makes here with like the question of like, oh, what do I read first? The answer there is that, well, you have to read both, right? Essentially, it doesn't matter which order. You have to just read both. And like throughout his life, Hegel had both the phenomenology and the logic at number one. Like at different points in his life, he had the phenomenology and the logic at number one. and then he moved them around because he couldn't figure it out himself. And that's kind of the big thing where like, you know, like that's where Hegel like practically has to give up whatever he says about infinity to go back to whatever Kant said about finitude, because eventually you do have to make a sort of decision on, well, what do I pick first? It can't be both. You can't write a book that is both the phenomenology and the logic. But if you read the phenomenology, you will and the logic, you will definitely see the logical parts in the phenomenology, and you will definitely see phenomenological parts in the logic. That's kind of you like that's the thing with Hegel. It's about, the bigger picture.
I mean, it's I meant like it went from like the dialectic of reflection to the dialectic of the universal, singular, particular, or whatever. That's what I meant with that. In the concept section of the logic, is what I meant with the three. So sorry if that was unclear.
No, it's fine. That's fine.
No, not at all. Not at all. Okay, well, I think that that's like kind of a natural time to just disperse. But like, thank you all for coming. This is really, really fun for me and really awesome. And we'll pick right back up next week. Same sort of deal. Don't feel like you have to have. We're kind of just going to read it together. I saw Slinky. You're like, hey, why don't you read for us? I was reading for us. I was reading for us.
No, you were telling us to read. You were asking, hey, who can read for me?
I
Who's my
eventually, I
little?
eventually, I eventually
You
read.
were,
I eventually read.
yeah, because I
I
told you.
think I read earlier before. I didn't see that you
No, you
said
read
that.
because I told you.
If I had seen that, I would have never read. If I had seen you
No, you
saying that,
read
I
because I
wouldn't have
told.
done it.
Hey, what is? Why are you? Why are
These,
you falling back on your orders now?
I just I got to remember the phenomenology. Got to go
Yeah,
back
you
through
have
it.
to.
Okay. All right. Thank you all so much. Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye.